Welcome to B'madzaji Ganonendwa. This podcast is produced by the Communications Department at the Anishinabek Nation. We will be focusing on the issues and initiatives in Anishinabek Nation territory. I'm your host, Lisa Abel.
Are you interested in Northern policing? Imagine this, 10 days on protecting our communities, followed by 11 days off to reset, recharge, and live your life.
That's correct.
At the Anishinabek Police Service, you'll serve with purpose. Enjoy salary and a pension at par with the OPP, with Northern isolation pay and free accommodations while on duty.
Officers are on scene.
Built for the North, balanced by design. Visit anishinabekpolice.ca and apply today.
This is the first of a two-part series called Finding Percy. Some of the content of this episode may be upsetting to some listeners. We will be discussing residential schools and missing children and unmarked burials. If you need support, please take the space you need and approach someone you trust. You can access the Hope for Wellness helpline at 1-855-242-3310 or by online chat at hopeforwellness.ca. This service is available 24/7 to all Indigenous people across Canada. 80 years ago, in the mid-1940s, Percy Onabigon was a boy who lived in Long Lake 58 First Nation, a small Anishinabe community 300 kilometers northeast of Thunder Bay. Percy was fully included as a part of his family and community. He had epilepsy and paralysis on one side of his body. In 1946, at 8 years old, Percy was taken, along with his older sister Bertha and his two brothers, Kenny and George, to St. Joseph's Indian Residential School in Thunder Bay. However, within a few months, Percy was transferred to nearby McKellar Hospital. Percy was then sent to the Ontario Hospital School, OHS, at Orillia, and remained in Southern Ontario into adulthood, without his family's knowledge or consent. Percy was moved back and forth many times between OHS Orillia and another facility called the Woodstock Hospital for Epileptics. Percy passed away in 1966 at 27 years old. His family was never informed of his whereabouts during his lifetime, and they only learned later on that he had moved on to the spirit world and was buried in Woodstock, more than 1,200 kilometers from home. Percy's family never forgot about him. They continued to talk about him and keep his spirit alive. Claire Onabigon, the daughter of Bertha Onabigon and Percy's niece, fought tirelessly to find him. It took over 20 years of research and advocacy to successfully return Percy to Long Lake First Nation. As we will hear over these two episodes, Percy's repatriation was fraught with bureaucratic obstacles. Archival records were difficult to access. The family's requests for funding were denied. They were questioned about the legitimacy of Percy's experience. The Onabigon family was undeterred. The province of Ontario eventually provided the support to bring Percy home. Last spring, Onabigon family members traveled to Woodstock to conduct ceremony as Percy was exhumed. Percy Onabigon was finally welcomed back home to Long Lake 58 in September 2025. Claire Onabigon is a sister, mother, grandmother, and auntie. She has lived in Long Lake 58 and Ganogaming First Nation all of her life. She completed her thesis on the impact of the residential school system on these two communities. As education director at Long Lake 58, she was recognized for her vision and commitment in supporting the development of a K-12 history curriculum to help the youth of Long Lake learn the rich history of their community and families. Claire was determined to honor her promise to her mother, Bertha Onabigon, to find Percy. Claire acknowledges that many people assisted along the way. We will also hear from Kelsey Anger, director of the Anishinabek Nation Reconciliation Department. Kelsey's research and advocacy skills helped to uncover documents from many sources to trace Percy's life journey and support Percy's return to Long Lake 58 in a culturally informed way that respected the family's wishes. So Claire, I have some tobacco here. I'm going to send it to you. And I'm keeping this with me right now and speaking to you. But I'm offering this to you to say miigwech for sharing your story and your family's story and Percy's story.
Miigwech. I am honored to do that.
Miigwech. Claire, we're here to speak about the story of your uncle Percy Onabigon. You know, the story of what happened to him. So before we get to start talking about your uncle Percy, how about if we start by, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little about yourself and where you're from?
Yeah, for sure. I'm Claire Onabigon. My mom was Bertha Onabigon. I lived all my life in this area, either on Long Lake 58 or Ganugaming First Nation. I am the third child. I have an older sister and an older brother and two younger sisters. I'm currently the education director at Long Lake 58 First Nation and have been in the education field for all of my career life. I have a daughter, or we have a daughter, Mandy, who herself has three children.
So you're a mom and a grandma.
And an auntie.
And an auntie.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I take that role very serious. But an auntie, not only to my sisters and my brother's children, but also my cousin's children and my cousin's grandchildren. Oh, yes. Yes, we are a very close family.
So it's a big extended family at Long Lake 58. We've kind of spoken a little bit before about the story of your Uncle Percy, and your family has always remembered your Uncle Percy and always kept his memory alive in your family. So how about, can you tell me, if we can learn in your own words, what happened to your Uncle Percy? What's his story?
So Percy's story is a sad one because he was 8 years old, and when he left his parents, my grandparents, he was never seen again. He never saw his parents, his grandparents, his brothers, sisters, or his community ever again. So that's the sad and tragic story of Percy. His life was lived out in institutions in Southern Ontario. Back home, he was a kid like any other kid. He would laugh and have fun, and some of his fun was just watching his brothers and sisters and cousins play, and he would laugh from that. He would enjoy watching them. But he was at home with his family, with his grandparents. And for 20 years, for the rest of his life, he was without all of that. We knew that he was paralyzed, and we knew he had epilepsy. So my mom, being the oldest, could remember Percy the most, I guess. She told us how he would help my grandmother fold diapers, and how he always had a special way of doing things because he only had the use of one arm. There was only a little bit that they knew of Percy, except that he was 8 years old when he went to St. Joseph's boarding school with my mom and my two uncles. We also knew that when he was at St. Joseph's that he went to McKellar's Hospital. But what my mom and uncles didn't know was why he went to McKellar's Hospital. They never knew if he had a seizure. So they knew that he went to McKellar's Hospital just 2 months after being at the boarding school in Thunder Bay. I'm not even sure if they even knew that he was transferred or sent to other hospitals in Southern Ontario. So Percy was never seen or heard from again, and I can't imagine what the family felt. But if I had to guess, I would say powerless. And I always wonder if they believed, well, this is the life for us. This is how it is for us. Because they had all gone through the residential school system. They knew that their parents had no choice. They knew that whatever happened to them there happened. They witnessed and experienced abuses. So their feelings were never talked about. Their feelings, I imagine, were never validated. There was no caring shown to them, I imagine. So despite the residential school system and everything it meant to take from them, and it did take a lot, it did take a lot, but it didn't take the love for each other. And that's why Percy's story and Percy's life lives on in us, because they showed us love and they showed us how much they loved Percy, even though he was never seen again. My mom's cousin, Penny, who I call Auntie, told me that she remembers my mom saying, I wonder where Percy is. This would have been after my granny died, so after 1960. So my mom was already an adult then. She was older, and she still never knew where Percy was. I believe she found out when they were notified that he died. So they knew that he went to McKellar's Hospital just 2 months after being at the boarding school in Thunder Bay. And then he was sent to the Ontario Hospital in Woodstock, where he died and was buried. But none of the pieces in between did they know. My mom talked to her children about Uncle Percy. So my mom, being the oldest, could remember Percy the most, I guess. And my Uncle George told stories as well. I don't remember all the stories, but there must have been a lot, because all of us, my cousins and I, we all knew Percy. So these stories that were told and shared among us between our aunties, uncles, and even the cousins, these stories proved that if you love someone, you never forget them. Even though we never knew Uncle Percy personally, we loved him. So my great-grandparents were still alive too when Uncle Percy was taken. So bringing him home was for my great-grandparents, my grandparents, and my mom, my aunts and uncles. And that's why we did it, because we were always together, and it was important that Percy was brought home so that he could be home with them and be together with them. In my lifetime, I'd only seen my mom cry 2 times. In 1997, December, my Auntie Hazel had died, and there were 5 sisters, and those sisters were so close. The 2 brothers, my Uncle Kenny and my Uncle George, had already passed away. And it was at the cemetery when we were burying my Auntie Hazel that I saw my mom cry the second time in my life. And I knew that she was thinking about Percy also during this time. So I told her that I would find Percy and I would bring him home. So I had made a promise to my mom. Immediately after Christmas in January, I started looking for Percy. Back then you could dial 411 and get an operator. I asked the operator for all the cemeteries in Woodstock. So I'm not sure how many numbers I got or how many cemeteries I called, but when I called St. Mary's Roman Catholic Cemetery in Woodstock, and the person said, just hold on, let me check, I'll see if he's here. see if he's buried here. And when she came back and said, yes, Percy is here. What an incredible feeling. I was able at least to tell my mom that I found him. But that's as much as I could do for my mom at that time.
In the meantime, many residential school survivors were breaking the silence about their experiences and calling for justice. Class action lawsuits against the federal government and churches led to the Indian Residential Schools Settlement Agreement, which came into effect in 2007. The settlement included a common experience payment for all former students, an out-of-court abuse claim process, funding for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and a public apology to former students of the residential school system.
I was at Six Nations Polytechnic, and with a few of my colleagues there, I mentioned my Uncle Percy being buried nearby in Woodstock. And Donna Chief from Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation, she offered to drive me there. So with her partner and I, we set out on a Saturday morning to go to Woodstock. We found the cemetery, and then when we got there, I was so upset. I was overwhelmed because the magnitude of what I walked into hit me hard. First of all, there were so many graves there. I didn't know even if he had a marker, if he had a gravestone. And I remember becoming so upset and Donna having to calm me down. So she took control and she said, okay, this is what we're going to do. So she sectioned off the cemetery for us. She said, Claire, you're going to go to this section and you're going to walk up and down the aisles here. I'm going to go here. My partner's going to go there. So let's go. Let's see what we find. So once I calmed down, once I saw that I wasn't alone in this, I set off walking up and down the rows that she gave to me. And I found him. I was the one who found him. I believe it was meant to happen that way. So again, Donna took charge. She did a ceremony. Yes, we did a ceremony there. We had a little feast, and we feasted him. We offered tobacco. And I always carried with me a picture of my mom and my aunts. And I left that picture there. And I told Percy, we found you. You were never forgotten. You were always loved. When I found Percy at Woodstock, I had 3 aunties left. So I had taken a picture of his grave marker with that picture of the 5 sisters. And I put it in a frame for each of them when I gave them each that picture. They were silent at first. When they saw Percy's name, they obviously knew it was his gravesite, but they were in shock. I imagine they felt this was something that was impossible for them, to see Percy's gravestone. Impossible that Percy was found. It was years before anything more could happen for Percy. After the common experience payment, I called Indian Affairs and I spoke to someone I knew there, and I asked if there was any monies through that fund to bring people home, people who went to residential schools and never made it home. But I told there was none. So that was in 2007, 2008, I believe I made that call. And it wasn't until Kelsey Anger from the Anishinabek Nation began the search. And her work involved working with the coroner's office. And they were able to get records that we had no access to. And it's all those records that put the pieces together for us.
Kelsey Anger is the director of the Anishinabek Nation's Reconciliation Department. Kelsey's undergraduate work was in human rights and human diversity, with a focus on Indigenous history. She also more recently received a micro-credential in investigative genetic genealogy. She has been with the Anishinabek Nation for 5 years, starting as a youth coordinator with Kogonasawin. As more class action settlements have become available for First Nations people, Kelsey developed a program to help our vulnerable citizens complete their applications with trauma-informed support and access the compensation they deserve. When the remains of over 200 potential burial sites were uncovered by ground-penetrating radar at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School in 2021, there was widespread shock, grief, and anger across Canada. It was as if Canadians had awakened to the grim truth that many of our First Nation communities have always known, that thousands of children never came home from residential schools. The federal government established a funding program in 2022 to support community-led efforts to locate, document, commemorate, and memorialize burial sites associated with former residential schools, and to honor families' wishes to bring the children's remains home. As the Anishinabek Nation began to support our lead communities tasked with residential school burial site searches and repatriation of children's remains, that portfolio eventually became part of Kelsey's position. What had been a special project at the Anishinabek Nation became a standalone reconciliation department in 2025, with a small staff dedicated to helping communities and survivors. Chimigwech, Kelsey, for taking part in our podcast.
Wech, thanks for having me.
How did you start working with Claire Onabigon and their family?
So it's 2026 now. I believe it would have been 2022 or 2023. So right when I just started this work, I think I was probably the only staff doing this before I hired folks. And I had put out a poster, I think, or a brochure maybe, and it essentially said how we can support survivors and lead communities and what we were doing. And Claire, that somehow ended up in Claire's hands. And she reached out to me and told me about Percy, told me about her decades-long search for him, and that he's one of these missing children from residential schools. However, she did know where he was buried. So I had incredible leadership supporting me. Specifically, Grand Chief was such a push for me she kind of said, make it fall in the mandate. We have to do this. It's, everything has kind of failed so far. And Claire had been trying to find a way to figure out what happened to Percy and bring him home since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And when survivors were receiving compensation for the independent assessment process and the common experience payment, she had reached out and they had said, it's only for those that are living that had experience at residential schools. So since then, she'd reached out to various different places and had been denied the financial support needed to bring him home. So I probably had a phone call with her, and you have had the pleasure of talking with Claire and hearing her passion and her resilience and just refusal to accept that something isn't going to happen. So I said, well, I will do my very best to figure out how to get this funded, but let's figure out what happened. But there's very little documents, and that's the reality with a lot of Indigenous families and communities, is the records are in the hands of the church, the government. That's, again, the struggle with these class action settlements, is asking someone to prove something that it's not reasonable for them to have copies of these things. I don't have my records from school. That's not something I would ever think I need to keep or retain to prove that I was there at one point. but that's what's being expected. So we knew 1938 was the year that Percy was born. Claire knew the date. She'd done a lot of genealogical work to figure out their family tree. And she knew that Percy was born as a twin. It was a difficult birth from what we understand. And Percy and Harold were born. There's this incredible photo that Claire's been able to find of the two of them soon after being born, the family sitting there. It's just an amazing photo that's been preserved, and I can never get over it looking at it. That's Percy, that's him, that's who we're looking for. And Harold's in that photo, so Harold is the twin. And this is where family history and the oral narrative is so important. We know that Percy lived and that Harold died soon after he was born, that he was very sick. We know that Percy was born with paralysis and that he was prone to seizures, so he was epileptic. And the complexities of the records start right off with that. So Percy lived, Harold passes away at St. Joe's Hospital in Thunder Bay. However, Percy is written on the death certificate and Harold is not. So Harold has no death certificate as of right now, and Percy Onabigon has two. The parents' names are wrong also on that death certificate. So because we weren't there, we can just go with the time, 1938, 1939. We know how First Nations peoples were treated. We know how the healthcare system was treating them. But what we do know now is that there were twins. One of them did survive, and that was Percy. What she knew was that he had went to residential schools. He had been taken in 1946, and then she'd been able to find his burial in Woodstock, so thousands of kilometers away, and found that he died in 1966. So there's 20 years that the family doesn't know, that she doesn't know. Percy's mother passed away and was never able to see him again. That was what she approached me with. She said, "This is the photo of Percy's grave. We know he's in Woodstock. His name's spelt wrong. The stone says 1938 to 1966, so it didn't even list the day he died. So all they've ever known was it was 1966. Somehow he ended up in Woodstock." So Claire gave me all of that information, and I started doing some digging, some research, and tried to figure out why he would have been in Woodstock at that time, 1966. There was a hospital, the Woodstock Hospital for Epileptics. So I thought, that's a really good place to start. Quite possible that Percy ended up down there because I knew the diagnosis. I knew that the family knew he had epilepsy. And we knew the year he died, which was a really important point, but we didn't have a date. So in order to get a death certificate for someone, you have to know the date that they passed away.
The first step in the search for Percy was to confirm that his death had been registered in Ontario. Kelsey applied for a death search letter on behalf of the Onabigon family and inputted all possible spellings of Percy's family name. Once they received confirmation that Percy Onabigon had died in 1966, they applied for his official death certificate.
So I remember the day I opened the letter from Ontario, and we found the date that he actually died. It was May 1st, 1966. And the day that I opened it was May 1st, 2023, I want to say. So I was just blown away. I remember calling Claire and I was like, "You won't believe this," but I don't know the math right now, but I was like, it's today. This is the anniversary. And we got that document. And we found out he was 27 years old when he died. And he was 8 years old when he went to residential school. So his formative years, nearly all of his life was spent somewhere, and the family didn't know.
Now that Claire and Kelsey had obtained Percy's official death certificate, they were able to request more information about Percy from the Ontario archives.
I asked them to look into the Woodstock Hospital for Epileptics, and that was really the kind of piece that broke everything open, that led us to understand. So it sounds much easier than it was, but I had to figure out even what Woodstock was called, because it doesn't go by that name now. It's Oxford Regional Centre. So when you do the request, you have to ask for it under the current name. So it's a lot of background research of, I had to figure out, what that hospital was and all the details in order to do my request to the archives. And I believe I had to get another signature from Claire on this before they would give me the information, but we were able to get admission and discharge records from Woodstock. So it was a PDF, a big document where 99% of a page had been redacted, but I could see P. Onabigon, and I could see what the records book had as the category. So I could go down from the top and see it said location of transfer, and it would say OHS, OHS Aurelia. And then the left side, I could see the dates of when his first admission is. So it was many, many pages, and I sorted through them to figure out his timeline, essentially. And so what we learned from that is he was admitted to Woodstock a couple years after he went to residential school. So there's still a gap. But then we see he's transferred in and out many times. I think 5 times in his life. He leaves Woodstock, goes somewhere else, and then a year later he comes back. Ultimately, his last transfer takes place, and then he passes away in Woodstock in 1966. So we kind of filled that end part, but there was still so much information I couldn't figure out. And like I said, there was one notation of OHS Aurelia. And so had to go through, do the research, figure out OHS is Ontario Hospital School. Ontario had hundreds of these Ontario Hospital, Toronto, Ontario Hospital, North Bay. These were the names of them. So going through, figuring out what it would have currently been called, which is Huronia Regional Center, I believe, and then go through and do the request.
But the Ontario archives didn't have Percy's hospital records. A privacy officer suggested they put in an Access to Information and Privacy, or ATIP, request with the Ministry of Children, Community, and Social Services, also known as MCCSS.
So I was very lucky that the privacy officer was compassionate. She knew what we were looking for, and she recommended where else I can look. So that's the way they should work, but it's not always, because they might not know or they might not have time to make the recommendations. So I had to go through and fill all of that in. And you indicate on the section of what facility you want the records for. And this again was a really eye-opening moment, because there's 15 different institutions or facilities that MCCSS has those records for that you wouldn't find at Ontario Archives. Yeah, so there's, Aurelia, Whitby, Thunder Bay, Aurora, there's all these different institutions there. So I checked off Oxford Regional Centre, Woodstock, since I wanted to know if there were any other records. And then I included Huronia Regional Centre, Aurelia. And then I also put, I'm not sure, because I was hoping they would just search for everything. And I guess important to note is also the specificity of these requests. What I found is you want to include everything. You have to know what you're asking for, essentially. And if I just said, I want documents on Percy, would the person reviewing this give me everything, or would they give what they just view as documents? If there were photos, would they give them to me? Maybe, maybe not. So I had to ensure that my request included, admissions, discharge, client files, doctor's notes, photos, incident reports, Indian agent. I included literally everything I could think of that could possibly be held, and requested all of that. In October of 23, I got the reply that my Freedom of Information request was reviewed, and they gave it to me with no exemptions, because I was working directly with the family. They essentially gave me everything. And I downloaded that, and it was a scan of an actual client file. So like a manila envelope that says Percy's name. It says transferred from OH Woodstock, so Ontario Hospital Woodstock. It lists May 1st, 1950. He was 9 years old. He was transferred. Date of transfer, June 26, 1951. 11 years old. Transferred to OH Hospital. Length of residence. It was his admission. It was the doctor's notes of the physical things he had on him when he was admitted. So it talks about, the shoes, the socks. It talks about his sweatshirt, the toy he carried with him. It's doctor's notes of chest x-rays, and I think it's probably 30 pages, perhaps. And I sent that off to the family, of course, and one of the notes from a doctor that hits me, and whenever I speak about Percy, I always highlight this, is there's a note from a doctor that says, this patient has been hyperactive, destructive, and violent at times, which led to his admission here in 1947. He has right side paralysis and is epileptic. And I think of that, and I think of, any 8 or 9-year-old, and what child would not be hyperactive and destructive and possibly violent? Like it's such a one-sided view of this child that has physical disabilities, but then has also been taken from his home thousands of kilometers south. Was he asking about his parents? Was he speaking the language? Did he think they abandoned him? There's so much that would have been going through this little boy's mind, and they don't know anywhere in his files that maybe he's missing his culture. Maybe he misses his family. Maybe this food is different. Maybe the clothes is different. Maybe he doesn't understand what's happening. Maybe he misses the medicines or the geese or the noise, like nothing. No, they're not conscious at all that they've stolen his life and brought him here, and he's not adapting. This facility specifically had a class action settlement for survivors because of their horrendous treatment of patients.
You're talking about the Huronia Institute?
Yeah, yeah. There's a documentary about that facility. Ontario Hospital School in Orillia is what it was called. It was also known at one time as a lunatic asylum for chronic patients. There's a lot of documentation of horrific things happening to any patient, them being physically or mentally disabled and ending up at a facility. We know how society treated those people, let alone we add on the concept of racism and discrimination that we already experienced. There's ableism, racism that he likely would have experienced, and he's an 8-year-old boy with no one that he knows. This facility specifically has over 1,000 unmarked burials. There were many, many deaths at this facility, a lot of graves that are marked, and it ran since 1860 up till, I think it closed in 2009. So it ran for a very, very long time. And I remember calling Claire about this, and I remember her breaking down into tears.
I thought he was only at the hospital in Woodstock, but it turns out that when he was transferred to a hospital in southern Ontario, he actually went to that notorious hospital, the Orillia Lunatic Asylum for Chronic Patients. And when I learned that part, I was so upset because I had watched a documentary about that hospital. And I remember telling myself, oh, I'm so happy that Percy didn't go there, because I had believed he was only at the Woodstock Hospital. But that's why I watched the documentary, because it was a similar hospital that Percy was at. And then when I found out a few years later that Percy was actually there, was at the Orillia, Ontario Hospital, it almost crushed me. I had to force myself not to dwell on that, because my mom, my uncles and aunties everything they went through at the residential school system and losing Percy. We carry that pain for them, and it's not intentional. It's because we love them so much. They never ever, they never told us of their experiences at the residential schools. They never wanted us to hear what they experienced. But if they knew where Percy was, and if they knew of the stories of that Aurelia hospital, I don't know what it would have done to them. So I had to not think or dwell on that. I needed to still move forward about bringing Percy home. But it was good to talk to my cousins, though, and that's how I was able to work through that. And bringing that bit of information to them was hard for them to hear as well. That hospital was a lunatic asylum. Can you imagine an 8-year-old? He was a child. He was loved, and he lived the rest of his life in institutions like that. I don't know the stories from the Woodstock hospital, but I imagine they weren't so nice either. I imagine there wasn't a lot of understanding of him. I imagine he himself wondered why he was there, where his parents were, where my mom was, where his brothers were. I imagine he wondered, when am I going back home?
In this episode, we heard how Percy Onabigon, a young Anishinabe boy from Long Lake 58, was taken far away from his community. His family kept his memory alive for generations. Claire Onabigon was determined to keep a promise to her mother Bertha to find Percy. With the help of the Anishinabek Nation's Reconciliation Department and the dedicated work of Kelsey Anger, the pieces of Percy's life slowly began to come together. The family had to come to terms with what they learned about Percy's experiences as he was moved through institutions in Southern Ontario. Percy's story is but one example of the thousands of children who were taken away to residential schools and didn't come home. But the Onabigon family's strength, love, and refusal to let his story be forgotten reveal the enduring resilience of families who continue to fight for answers and bring their relatives home. This story can bring up strong emotions. If you need support, please take the space you need and approach someone you can trust. You can also access the Hope for Wellness helpline at 1-855-242-3310 or by online chat at hopeforwellness.ca. This service is available 24/7 to all Indigenous people across Canada. Chimigwech to Claire Onabigon and Kelsey Anger for taking part in the podcast, and to the Anishinabek Nation Reconciliation Department for supporting this episode. Please join us in part 2 as we continue the journey, uncover more of Percy's story, and follow the Onabigon family's path towards truth, ceremony, and closure. Chimigwech for listening to Bamadzaje Ganonindwa. Until next time, Bama P.